For the first episode we're going to be reviewing as part of Season 4 of Steven Universe, it will be Know Your Fusion, which is where Steven and Amethyst fuse together as Smoky Quartz in front of Pearl and Garnet, who are really excited as they fuse into Sardonyx to do a talk show and other elements in order to understand who Smoky Quartz is. To be perfectly real with you, I've been waiting to do this episode, judging of how this dynamic of fusions talking to each other, all the while understanding the personality of Smoky Quartz and her abilities. Believe me, it's difficult for Garnet and Pearl to deny an opportunity to do something like this, and the only way for Sardonyx room to appear at the temple is for Sardonyx to happen, all the while making preparations in order to make Smoky Quartz to show to people, mainly the audience, that Sardonyx made on who she really is. You know, if you really think about it more, if Steven fused with Garnet or Pearl before this episode even happened, I can guarantee you that they wouldn't be able to do an episode centering around the Sardonyx Tonight Show, considering that it's the fusion of Garnet and Pearl. So, either way, they intentionally saved the fusions on Steven and Garnet and Steven and Pearl later on, despite the problems that they went through, or the fact that they just wanted to have Steven fuse with Amethyst first, which, I'll admit, I was on board when it came to the dynamic between the two, but it probably would have been a lot more awkward if we see the fusions of Garnet and Amethyst, or Amethyst and Pearl talking to the fusion of Steven and Garnet, or Steven and Pearl, because if there would have been a different other way around when it comes to the technique that they did in this episode, it would have been a lot more physical, or really worth noting to make a fanfic out of, because believe me, people probably want to see a lot of fusions interact with each other in a different capacity, judging of how that this episode was that good to them. So getting back to the topic of fusion, the idea of seeing Sardonyx back was really good to have her return, and judging of how that she's being her own character with her interactions with Smoky Quartz, to tell you the truth, it really makes this episode a lot more interesting, considering that Smoky Quartz is trying to do these elements that Sardonyx had set up in order to showcase on who Smoky Quartz is, but to tell you the truth, when this is new to someone, mainly Garnet and Pearl, since that they witnessed the fusion of Steven and Connie, they're so into the idea that they really wanted to glorify it by showcasing on the importance of the fusion when it comes to the relationship of that specific people, mainly Steven and Amethyst. When it comes to Smoky Quartz in this episode, judging of how that she's being her own character despite the fusion of Steven and Amethyst, I really felt like that this entire episode's purpose is to showcase that she is trying to improve on herself on being who she is, and to tell you the truth, I can understand where Sardonyx is coming from, but at the same time, judging of how that they were thinking a little too overboard with this whole fusion, with it being bigger than the fusion of Steven and Connie when it comes to Savani. This is a lot more complicated for a fusion like Steven and Amethyst would do, because with doing the things that Sardonyx set up for Smoky Quartz to do, it just didn't work out. I mean, judging of how that Steven and Amethyst fusing together was just a surprise, Garnet and Pearl, when it comes to their powers, it was literally enough for them to showcase it to them. But at the same time, they were expecting a lot more, which for me personally, I don't blame them for doing what they did, because they didn't realize that the fusion of Steven and Amethyst only happened one time from the Earthlings episode. You gotta admit that you will have been in the same position as Pearl and Garnet in this episode when it comes to showcasing more when it comes to the fusion, because when you don't have enough information that Steven and Amethyst only fused once, it kind of shows that you wanted more when it comes to the fusion. Believe me, I know full well that the powers from Garnet and Pearl alone are limited, and when it comes to the fusion itself, they can do a lot more, but it takes time for them to do multiple powers instead of just loading all of them from the beginning. It's literally what you experience in real life, even though that fusion doesn't exist in real life. With the predicament that they almost got themselves in when it comes to the unfusion of Sardonyx, the room was about to get destroyed, and Smoky Quartz was lucky enough to save Pearl and Garnet just when they unfused back to Steven and Amethyst. Even though that this episode may be odd to think about if you're watching this casually, but for me personally, with the talk show when it comes to Sardonyx and Smoky Quartz, along with the fact that it leads to so many possibilities when it comes to fusion interaction, this really feels like a one-of-a-kind episode that centers around fusions interacting with each other, which is really a shame considering that later on, if we have more episodes, we will have having more scenes centering around the fusions of Steven and Pearl or Steven and Garnet interacting with other fusions or other characters. Or mainly somewhere along the lines on having an episode focusing on them, similar to Smoky Quartz and Sardonyx from this episode. Besides, when it comes to casual viewing, this episode was intentionally trying to break the fourth wall by having clips from old episodes from the show while having a parody of Cartoon Network on the lower screen of the TV screens that's been showed twice in this episode. To tell you the truth, it really shows the charisma in this episode when it comes to not only Steven Universe, but also Cartoon Network, which is a shame that I don't think it will probably work in the predicament that Cartoon Network is in right now. I'm giving this episode an 8 out of 10.